So welcome and thank you for clicking into this video presenting smart cities in Germany and the MENA region, which actually is a research project run by the AGYA working groups of energy and water and innovation. Um, in these groups, we discussed about what could we do in order to foster mutual understanding between Germany and the MENA region. We came up with energy and innovation, of course, with a concept almost naturally of smart cities, which would be an interesting thing of comparison, we thought. So in that respect, we looked into literature, and that seemed to contradict us pretty much. I mean, what literature suggested is that the concept is, since its emergence, already largely analyzed. So you've got what I, as an economist, would call stylized facts, features of a city, which are already well established. So, well, number one, smart cities is about the integration of smartness and sustainability via information and communication technologies. That's set by the OECD back in 2012, confirmed by research later on. So the better the algorithms, the better the data quality, the more data you have, the better a smart city will be run as a sort of underlying aspects. In terms of energy and mobility, you've got pretty many authors arguing that smart cities, wherever you look at them, be it in India, be it in South Korea, be it in Europe or the MENA region, is pretty much in the energy and mobility field around the same components, which can be arguably sort of plug and play components. So always the same, and you can pick one from one city and just implement that in the next city. That would be pretty much renewable energies, energy efficiency, and mobility solution like traffic management and e-mobility. So here again, this idea of having a plug and play box, which is around. And then finally, what you can find around was that you've got pretty many indicators for analysis which are well established. So just to mention the EU City Key project of European Horizon 2020 funding, the Fraunhofer Morgenstern project, or the EU Smart Cities, giving you indicators in order to compare, to analyze a dedicated smart city project and comparing at least some aspects of these smart cities. So that looked actually like it wasn't a worthwhile project taking on. But when we looked deeper, actually we found two things which were striking to us. Pretty many of these projects and research looked on smart cities from the outside. So somebody just, taking a look, walking around, doing observations, doing their sort of indicator work, but just looking at the outside of a smart city project, which is pretty much missing the inside perspective. Smart cities is people, decision makers, politicians, local actors deciding on what is implemented and what is not implemented. Then, of course, was the question, well, if it is already said, is there a possibility of mutual learning between the German concepts and the MENA concepts? So we took a look at the room for mutual learning. And well, there is. And if you just look at that slide, and here again, stylized facts, the classic German project would be a project which is about updating, revamping existing infrastructure which is already around, meaning that the projects will be, in comparison, rather small projects, updating, digitalizing, smartening town quarters, or even only streets. Typically, these projects would be started by research. So, what would be the best sort of technology? What would be the best solution in order to implement a smart street lighting system or other things? So, pretty much a research feature quite often at the start of these projects. They would be very much local projects. So local implementation is very strong on the German side, meaning that you've got local actors, local utilities, local companies doing and implementing the project. And with that, you've got a very strong sort of bottom-up logic, meaning that it's very much about citizen engagement at the local level and central government, the national government, not really mingling apart from research funding and support. Take a look at the MENA side in contrast. New infrastructure. Quite often, smart city projects are about getting new town quarters in place, which by definition gives you bigger projects, Classically, these projects are started by government, and these governments aren't interested so much in playing with technology and research. What they want to achieve is the best practice, best technology, new town quarter, which is why they don't fiddle along by testing this and that concept. Usually, it's pretty much an international buy-in by competition of concepts, and only the best practice is taken and implemented. And the implementation is done as a national project, often run by central government, national government, meaning that it's a rather top-down structure. So if you just take these features, and we were pretty amazed actually when we just, sort of did that sort of shopping list, there is huge potential for mutual learning, which we wanted to trigger out and see what actually can you take out of these experiences, both in Germany and the MENA cities. Well, as classic scientists, we started off with a literature readout, computer-aided screening, and we assembled sort of amazing 47,000 papers, which we read out for their relation to Germany and MENA smart cities, which still gave us 9,300 papers, which we analyzed using, well, computer screening and artificial intelligence in order to get through in reasonable time. And to cut a very long story short, we identified a clear gap in literature. We were right. The inside perspective was largely missing in these readouts. And the inside perspective was very much investigating in why are people doing it? Why are city planners? Why are governments doing smart cities? What's the motivation to engage really? Is that similar? Is it different? What can you learn from that? Then we were, well, as energy and innovation growth, fascinated by the energy and mobility side. We wanted to investigate, is it really always the same? Is it just really plug and play? You establish it once at global level and you just roll it out for the rest of the globe? Question mark. And finally, we were interested in the real implementation of it. What would be the drivers of it? Would that be societal pressure? Would it be environment, climate change? What would be really the motivation and the sort of common ground to engage in smart city projects? And on the other side, quite harder to investigate, what would be barriers against the concept? What would be bottlenecks where actually implementation is not working as it should be and should be worked upon and identified? So based on socioeconomic features and geological settings, we identified, well, sample sizes of cities, so 7 cities in Germany and 7 cities in the broad MENA region, which were representative for their countries and representative pretty much for the cities, which were our focus of research, where we wanted to do an in-depth investigation of how are these cities managed, how are the projects run, do people running the project think the same? So that's the sample size. We had to trim down to 5 cities because some of the cities, well, were less ready investigatable in terms of changing concepts, which sort of would have fussed up the research. But we ended up with a nice basket of potential concepts to compare. Here's the research concept. Classic research. We started off with a literature review and read out of what did these almost 10,000 papers give us on these dedicated cities to form our hypothesis, which I just presented. Then we looked at the website to give us more update information on what is going on, what would be, bottlenecks, drivers, what would be the political everyday life of these smart cities, and contrasted that with great literature research, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, giving us research information, validating or falsifying what could be read on the website, because of course you can't expect the websites to say, well, our smart city project, is running short of resources for this and that. So the combined of that gave us a questionnaire, or led to a questionnaire, which held 75 open and closed ranking questions, largely based on ratings, Likert scale. So our interviews were quite exhausted after we've done the in-depth interviewing. but we used online tools for computer-aided personal interviews and telephone or Skype interviews in order to facilitate answering the questions and make sure that actually our response um, felt at ease with replying to our questions. We contacted 69 decision makers, so the real top decision makers of running and deciding on smart cities, received feedback from 25, 22 policymakers, 22 plus 3 really, in terms of detailed um, responses to our questionnaires, which we then applied quantitative analysis to, two blocks really, intra-group comparison. As we had more people per city, we checked, are people, are decision makers thinking the same, or are there different thoughts, different strands of ideas on how a smart city should be run in a given city. And then as a second step, once we are sure that, how do people think to the inside? What can we learn in terms of cross-group comparison? So comparing the German cities to the MENA cities to present our findings and make up our findings. Well, here they are. Motivations. Why engage in smart city projects? And as you can see, I've translated the findings into the 75 questions into bigger groups in order to make it digestible. But what you can see nicely on this slide is that pretty much German and MENA cities align around motivations on smart city projects. It's pretty much the same needs and the same underlying features which is of interest for governments to go for smart cities. That would be number one, resource and energy. So sparing resources, using renewable energies as an alternative way of giving you clean energy for a city. Climate adaptation was mentioned very highly on the agenda, so you can see that climate change, and if you would call the resource and energy part climate mitigation, climate adaptation is a very strong motivation to go for smart cities. Next, economics. Could I develop nationally, locally best practice which I could sell out? Yes, clear motivation, stronger in the German cities, but then remember it's about comparing intensities, a little bit stronger in the German cities of having that economic drive of I want to sell my concept to other cities than there would be in the MENA cities. Clearly, environment, green spaces, local air pollutants, getting rid of that in order to give you a better environment. Very strong, actually, motivation in both city groups and largely society pressing for cleaner cities, better maintained cities, better functioning cities, which are around. So, in terms of motivations, that seemed to sort of confirm that pretty much the cities in Germany, let's say as representative for Europe and the MENA region, are pretty much on the same page when it comes to smart city projects. Next in line, the question about energy. And here we were surprised because here you can see a clear difference between the German cities and the MENA cities on the other side. So the cities would agree and would be very interested to talk about renewable energies, a bit stronger in Germany, energy efficiency, a bit stronger in the MENA cities. So actually, these two features are confirming the sort of concept which is established in literature that you are having a sort of plug and play interest in the same components. Certainly confirmed for renewable energies, certainly confirmed for energy efficiency. So that would be really common interests. And to a similar extent, smart grids. So the technology side, the information and communication technology side of it, pretty much confirmed here again in our survey. In contrast, engaging consumers into smart grids and smart technologies in order to make them producers and consumers, prosumers at the same time, more developed in Germany than the MENA region, and starkly interesting, the mobility side. very high interest in the German cities, rather less interest in the MENA cities. So we look deeper, and here's a more fine-grained resolution at the details of mobility, which we looked into: public transport, cycling and walking, mobility and electric vehicles, and traffic management. So here again, interestingly, the sort of plug and play idea seems to be less confirmed, with German cities showing a very strong interest in getting rid of traffic jams, which are an issue, strong issue actually in the MENA cities as well, but a lower interest from government when it comes to actually implementing and working on that. So clearly the energy side prevailing over the mobility side in terms of what is around and what is of interest. You can actually, when you do a cluster analysis, you can actually get that to a detail of the individual cities. So on that cluster analysis, well, the more to the left in the diagrams you are, the closer you are in terms of features. What you can, for example, see without going into every detail is that pretty much Abu Dhabi's master city, which was arguably the kickoff for energy solutions and carbon-free cities, served as a blueprint for many of the German cities: Bremen, Munich, Berlin, but also for Doha. So here you would find a nice cluster of cities which are pretty much aligned across across countries, where you have very strong similarities, and where, of course, with these similarities, you can go for a very strong exchange. Um, Mobility, you can see that this exchange is rather between the German cities on the one side, so that's on top of the cluster diagram, and the MENA cities, which are on the bottom of the diagram. So here again, you would find sort of very strong regional clusters, but if you wanted to gauge a mutual learning, that is just what would be interesting in that aspect. Next, as I told you, we were looking at stakeholder alignment, and that is pretty much something which you can test with, well, intra-class correlation. So that's the first column. So the higher the first column number is to 1, the closer that is to 1, the higher people in the inside are aligned around the same idea. And just to give you one example, Berlin is rating very low here, meaning that people have very different views. So that's just quickly to show you that actually these numbers are not just, playing with statistics, but give you stories. And the story of Berlin, very quickly, is that actually Berlin in 2015 started off with a very strong top-down concept, which later on, as you can see, was changed to a bottom-up concept of doing decentralized city spaces, going for, playing with innovation and testing pretty much anything and everything which you could do in a smart city in different clusters. But still, in the administration, you had some people thinking the top-down concept was the better one, and other people coming in with the bottom-up concept, preferring that. So that is how this readout can tell you and inform you about what is going on. Are people on the same page when it comes to projects? Let's take a quick look at drivers and barriers. Here again, so driving the implementation very strongly, a driver for society, just to pick out that one. So pretty much a strong urge of growing middle classes and people wanting a cleaner environment, wanting better living conditions, and asking that of their government and saying, look, I want to have a clean surrounding, driver, environment, and energy. I want to have clean energy, good air conditions around me, and I want to have a well-maintained, well-governed city. That is pretty much here again, which are the sort of common features, including well-functioning economically city, where actually the German and the MENA cities pretty much agree upon. Barriers, slightly different. For example, just citing one, qualifications, finding good workforce locally, seems to be a much stronger concern for MENA cities and decision makers in MENA cities than it would be for German cities. So there again, you can see the aspects of mutual learning and mutual exchange. Um, Here again, you can get that closer to city level in order to see who should be talking, who should be looking into that. And finally, if people were to look into that, the question of who should be talking, and here you can see, interestingly enough, a very stark, contrast, which we had already in the stylized facts of local governance and local implementation on the German side, national implementation, national government being the top ranking entity of running a smart city project in the case of the MENA region, which of course implies that you have to get these two very different local and national levels, which usually wouldn't be talking to one another. You have to find some intermediary to get them talking and to get them on the same page in order to really get this knowledge transfer, which is massively potentially around, to get that really in place. So, summing up, motivation largely similar. We've got societal pressure for a better environment. We've got environmental pressure, local air pollutants, clean air, greener spaces, and we've got a very strong economic pressure from developing middle classes wanting more and wanting better living conditions. So, on that basis, German and MENA cities have a very strong potential for exchange because they are pretty much on the same page. If projects wanted to cooperate, that could be done in two ways actually. If you want to have a cooperation on pretty much the same page and similarities, you would go for the energy side. You would go for energy efficiency and renewable energies. That seems to be pretty similar in terms of interest, so you would have a direct exchange. If you want to go on the other side for mutual learning, you've got huge differences in addressing mobility. So if you wanted to really go for mutual learning, different concepts, doing things differently, mobility would be a topic and an issue where you could get mutual learning in place and learn from the differences. In terms of implementation, subgroupings of cities seem really promising because our research shows that it's not only the German cities on the one side, the MENA cities on the other side, but rather, depending on the topic, a very interesting mutual learning which is mixed between the cities. So here again, confirming that you've got very high potential for mutual learning because similarities are from city to city and not just between, regions differing very strongly. In terms of governance, there is a challenge. And the challenge is that you need to bring these projects together, which are on the one side national, so national speaking probably to national government, and on the other side local, rather more speaking to local government. So there is actually institutionally a gap to bridge where we would need to find intermediaries. And that is pretty much what we want to look at in further research. So linking, well, number one, finding a bridge to that gap, probably that would be largely you, I suppose, as intermediaries. Then we want to stronger link the motivation and our findings to the framework conditions, meaning the level of GDP, gross domestic product, sealed spaces, green spaces, air pollutants, commuters. So how strong are the economic pressures and drivers? How strong are the environmental and the societal drivers? And then, of course, finally get that to a larger sample size of interviews and of cities. So the journey in that research is far from being over. With that, I thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found the video interesting. I hope you found the research interesting. And with that, I wish you a very good conference. Thank you very much.